61-2, clear takeoff, left hand. Takeoff left, it is 3-1. Left land, swim west, copy. 3-1. Crossing 2-1. Crossing 2-4 is
Hello and welcome to the Blueskies podcast. I'm PR Ganapathy, your host.
Just 70, roger, report type southeast, connection, for the midway, and field selected.
Hey there, and welcome back to part 2 of the interview with Air Marshal Jayal. This time we cover his Squadron Command, participation in the Jaguar project team, as well as some issues related higher defense issues of the country. Now come back to Squadron Command. So you commanded one squadron, which is, one of the very prestigious squadrons of the Air Force. What was it flying at that time? Where was it based?
No, but we were based in Adhampur. When I joined the squadron, remember that I think it was 73, and the squadron had just taken part in the 71 war. So actually there was much more of consolidation, lessons being learned, what we did right, what we didn't do right. So actually I was in the process of learning more from the guys who had actually taken part in the operation, So it was an interesting experience. And of course, the only Indian astronaut Ricky Sharma joined my squadron later. So yeah, he was one of the young pilots.
Now, sir, during your flight test stage, you test flew some aircraft like the Alpha Jet and whatnot. What are some of those experiences like?
I flew when the government decided on the procurement of the advanced jet trainer, I was DSR in air headquarters. Mm-hmm. So I led a team we had shortlisted the Alpha Jet and the Hawk. So the government permitted us to go and evaluate these, which we did. And the team was led, the AS team was led by Philip Rajkumar. I just led the whole team. And in that bargain, I flew both the Hawk and the Alpha Jet.
A number of pilots who came back from Iraq kind of wondered why we didn't also include the L-39 for consideration, because they really enjoyed flying that in Iraq. Did we ever think of that?
I'm not sure whether L-39 ever came into our calculations, because I don't recollect. And if it was either turned down, but I somehow don't recollect any discussions in my time in ASR on the L-39, because the staff requirement was already made, and I think the shortlisting had been done. So I'm sure L-39, because when we do paper shortlisting, we put all the possible candidates, and then look at the requirements and shortlist, so that we don't have to flight evaluate dozens of them. We just do 2 or 3 of.
Right. Great, sir. So now if we can change gears to the induction of the Jaguar in 79, you went to the UK as the leader of the Jaguar project team. And so just use that example to give us a sense for when there's a new aircraft, how do we absorb the knowledge that is required, both in terms of maintenance, servicing, flying, operationally using an aircraft. So what is the project team? What did you do for those 3 years? And, and that's a template, I'm guessing, for any new aircraft that we acquire.
Just to go a little before that, actually, the requirement for what we used to call a deep penetration strike aircraft actually dawned on the Air Force in maybe 71, 72, where after the 71 war, suddenly what started happening was that the maintenance branch flagged a corrosion problem, first I think in the Canberra oleos, and followed not too long after on the Hunters. And the concern in air headquarters immediately and the ops branch became that if this problem magnifies, then we'll be left with no real strike aircraft. And we had just been through the 71 experience. So a staff requirement was drawn, and this Air Force had shortlisted these aircraft, and actually there was the Jaguar, the Vigan, the no Vigan, yeah Vigan I think, and the Mirage F1. These three aircraft were in the running, and after whatever it is evaluations, I think Bobby Day and Priti Singh were the two pilots who I think evaluated all these three. And actually, our preference, both after discussing thoroughly with the three teams, we found the Swedish people to be highly professional. The aircraft was good. The test pilots gave a thumbs up. So the Air Force was very keen on actually the Vigan. But what happened was that was the time that the Americans said that we will not. It had I think the Pratt and Whitney engine, and the Americans were not willing to part with that technology to India.
Oh, got it. Okay.
So actually, a team led by the Air Chief, I think Air Chief Latif at that time, they went to these countries. They met the high-level Ministry of Defense and all that, and came back and said that although Vigan was our preference, I think the next one we'll have to settle for the Jaguar because the British are willing to, and because we were in a bit of a panic, the British were then helping us in saying we will, because after all to start a new production line for somebody it's a 2-3 year time frame. You can't get it overnight. And because we were having this problem, this arrangement was made where the even soon after signing the contract, the BAE would refurbish some RAF aircraft to a basic standard, which was engines and something, and they would be called interim aircraft. So we would get aircraft quickly to operationalize at least one squadron. And once our production started coming back and all our order was full, we would return these interim aircraft, which actually we did afterwards. We flew those aircraft back to UK.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
didn't
yeah,
realize
yeah, yeah.
that.
We did. So the interim aircraft, the Jaguar, what it did was induction. It helped us get a strike aircraft fleet operational in the soonest possible time.
And so during the Jaguar project induction, did we have pilots there? Did we have engineers there? Combination? Did we have HAL people there? Because I know
But
we were planning to manufacture
yeah,
also.
but and one more thing I must say because the recent Rafale episode reminds me of it. Um, Once again, whenever there is a Western induction, at least I know that accusations, stories, rumors start flying thick and fast because there are lobbies in the corridors of Delhi, which are vendors, interested parties, the lot, and this is exactly what happened finally when we were going to get a Jaguar. Then there was an article which came out in that time. India Today was a brand new magazine. And it wrote an article which it pretended to have been written by a pilot who talked about how this whole Jaguar thing is not the best of the aircraft for the Air Force, blah blah blah, whatever it was, and it was so authentic that your the then prime minister, because we, before that we had uh, the chief, myself as ASR, we had given a presentation to the Cabinet Committee on Political Affairs. The Prime Minister was Shri Moraji Desai. We had answered all the questions they had. After that, this article came out, and the government said, go ahead, there is urgency. We don't want to be caught in a situation where the Air Force doesn't have strike aircraft. And notwithstanding this, when this article came out, Shri Moraji Desai said, called the chief and asked him, and the chief said, sir, let me do one thing. I will call the two test pilots who evaluated the aircraft, and behind a closed door you talk to them. So Babi Dey and Priti Singh were called from Bangalore or wherever they were. They met Prime Minister Moraji Desai one-to-one. No defense secretary, no chief, no DSR, nobody. Moraji Desai had satisfied himself that all this article is bogus and said, go ahead and clear the deal. That was the last hurdle that we had. And I'm reminded of it because recently when this Rafale thing and the Prime Minister's decision to go government to government, same again lobbies started saying money, we are paying more, people have been bribed, the usual nonsense, And if the government hadn't stood fast, again this procurement would have been delayed.
Delayed, right.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so in the UK then, this was the first time that, again, this was Chief Latif's idea. He says that we must set up a project team in UK because don't forget, this was the first time we were getting a so-called modern fighter with computers and, electronics and all the gubbins that we were not used to in the Air Force. So he said there should be a project team. And the Air Force Air Headquarters selected a very fine set of officers. I had a Wing Commander Ramamurthy as a mechanical engineer. I had Wing Commander Misra as an electronics engineer. I had Wing Commander Kasinath, who was a logistics officer, and myself. And we formed a team, and we had a staff of a JWO and a civil clerk GD. And we set up what BAE said, we'll give you an office in the factory. So the good part was that this team was able to keep a track right from the beginning. If there were any design changes to be made, that they would be made. Our people any modifications, our engineers would discuss with their designers. And I think to sum it up, when we were finally, the team was winding up, Sir Frank Rowe, who was the chairman of BAE, in his farewell speech, he said, this is the first time that we've had this experience of having a foreign customers technical team sitting with us. But I just want to tell them that although they may have been, really tough on us, but I want to tell the team that actually we have learned a lot from how to deal with a professional customer.
Ah, right. Wow, fascinating.
So I think that about summed it up. And then, of course, once we came back, mind you, the team had done all the logistics people and engineers had done all the work about spares pack, how much, what we should order, what we shouldn't order, all that was done. And then what really was needed was our training, our engineers and all to come and train, our pilots to come and train.
Right. And then you continued your association by being put as the AOC of Ambala, where the Jaguars were based. So
Yeah,
you
well,
saw
I
it
think,
also
yeah,
go into operational service. Huh?
yeah, we know it was. In all fairness, Mini Baba, who was the air attaché when we were in the team in Jaguar in Morton, he was our air attaché in London, so he was quite familiar with uh, all the going on this contract. So he actually was the AOC when the Jaguar. So they were ferried when we were still there.
Aha, okay. Mm.
So the squadron set up actually when I was still in UK because we saw all the aircraft get ferried out before we wound up.
Got it. And of course, I'm sure there was none of the fanfare and media coverage that we see now of the Rafale. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. Yeah,
So you went on to various staff appointments, and then, of course, two commands of the Eastern Air Command and Southwest Air
yeah,
Command.
yeah, yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I've taken so much of your time, and I'm feeling terribly guilty. But can two big questions that I have for you. The first is, you've spent a lot of time in air staff requirements as joint director and then director. You were
Yeah,
then
yeah,
ACAS
yeah,
plans.
yeah,
And
yeah.
when we think of aviation procurement or military aviation procurement planning lead times, you're forecasting a threat environment and then you're procuring for that threat environment and you're expecting that aircraft to remain in service for another 30 years after that. So there's a lot of crystal ball gazing, which if you don't get right, there's a lot of significant implications. And how should we think about this? How do you do it, and how do you predict something that's so far out in the future and has so much uncertainty? Because there's technological developments, threat environment developments, scientific developments that are going to change the way things are in the future.
So, Ghana, it is what you have flagged is an actual problem, especially today when technology is galloping. And your avionics and technology is galloping. In the older days, don't forget that Jaguar was the first aircraft which had a computer,
Right.
and the first lot of computers that we had, the entire nose compartment of the Jaguar used to be filled with full of about 4 or 5 boxes, the size of what 3 feet by 2 feet or something, that big. You see, all those must be now in your cell phone. I think the total computing capacity. So that was now the way the technology is galloping is huge. But so what we do in formulating an air staff requirement is apart from just the technical side. Therefore, this is a joint effort when we are formulating the requirement with the R&D, with the industry, with the user, the ops branch, and the plans branch. So any expertise that is in any field, because every field has an expertise. The idea being that we can look forward and forecast at least for the next 20, 30 years. And I can understand the problem they may be having today or in the last 10, 15 years, where actually technology is galloping virtually every week. So it is for people today now. I don't even know with the drone technology coming in how long man fighters are going to be in vogue. Frankly, I don't know.
Right.
You know, so yes, it is a challenge, and but I think what we do try and do, is that every possible input in the country. So that is whether it's industry, whether it is civil, and now hopefully because the government is bringing a private sector industry also into it, many of those brains, all of them together sit and say, listen, an aircraft which has to come 20 years hence, what should we expect it to do? That is point number one. The point number two is we have got to shorten are bureaucratic procedures. So once a staff requirement is formulated, once it is accepted, then there should be, in fact, I used to always pride myself that we've had no problems because we in the plans branch consider late Air Chief Marshal Latif as the father of planning in the Air Force, because I think he was the first ACS plans who really set up this thing. Then he brought in Chandu Gole as his DSR. They really set up the structure for this entire planning, forecasting, and so on and so forth. It stood us for good stead in those many decades, you know. Yeah, but unfortunately, I think the helicopter Augusta helicopter scandal first time put the searchlight on our procurement. And until then, I used to pride and say that Air Force there are no scandals on our procurement. You see, and if the bureaucracy and the MOD take time, then well, what can we do? The chief can only go and sort of plead with the government, and so yeah. But you have a point. I think in each one of these areas, because of the rapid advances in technology, in the rapid advances in costs, and threats, changes in threats, I think we have to sharpen this very, very. In fact, only day before yesterday, when back in 2014, I was one of the presidents of the Aeronautical Society of India, one of the vice presidents, and old Pushpinder was one of the members. And we decided in the society, Mr. Madhavan was ex-ISRO chief, he was the chairman, and we decided that earlier under Dr. Kalam, when he was president of AESI, they had proposed an aeronautical policy for the government in '98, I think, or something. We thought it should be revised, so we revised that policy, and we made a new policy in 2014, which I personally discussed with the Air Chief, with the DGCOA, so that all aviation activities in the country, their inputs are into it. And the Aeronautical Society of India gave a proposal to the Air Headquarters in 2014. You see, I don't know what happened to that at all, but unless we do something like this in aeronautics for the future, then I'm afraid this ad hocism will not be a very cost-effective thing for the Air Force and for the country. Yeah.
For the country as a whole, yeah.
Just need 7B, like your import IP southeast, connect for somebody's way, and you'll select it.
Great. So my last question is, you've commanded in the east as well as on the western side, Southwest Air Command. Can you give us a flavor for, the threat environment, the range of threats and environments in which we operate between the east and the west, and particularly for the non-military public, so they have a better appreciation of the sorts of challenges that our armed forces have to deal with, particularly the Air Force?
The normal perception always at headquarters and at the higher echelons of government and people's perception is, and that this has been specifically strong in the recent past when they've been talking about theater commands. The sort of perception that goes is that the services don't work together, you see, and each one has got a kingdom. Now, this may be true to a large extent in the Delhi environment of service headquarters and the government. But my experience in the field as a commander is that in the field, and I always quote this because when the IPKF operations were going on, I was ACS operations in air headquarters. And I said, I get no inputs or no panic and nothing from the field. They're not demanding anything. I want to go and see what are helicopter boys and what are they doing there. And what I saw and what I heard from the military commanders and all that, this team there was no Air Force, Army, Navy. They were all working and producing magnificent work. Okay, without us in air headquarters even knowing what they were doing. Given the weapon systems, given the freedom to tackle a threat, they were performing excellently. My experience in Eastern Air Command, where again the Air Force and the Army have to work like one. There's no question about. In fact, in the East, it was not just the Air Force and the Army. I was amazed to see that every chief minister that I called on, because they are so dependent on air support. I mean, some of the places in Arunachal are, at least till that time, were totally dependent on air support. So there were villages in Arunachal where if the AN-32 didn't come with its sheep or cattle or food or whatever, they would actually be without supplies. You know, so every chief minister was so conscious, and they would, and amazingly, some of them would actually call me directly. Not their staff or anybody.
Right.
They would have a direct chat. So I certainly believe that in Eastern Air Command we worked very cohesively, very well, and it is a very challenging environment for warfare, not just for us, even for the Chinese. Now, whether we've built better infrastructure now in the last 20, 30 years, I don't know. But obviously it is inevitable that we must do so or have done so, because at the end of the day, it is not either cost effective or safe to rely only on air support for logistics of armaments and supplies and things. So that was Eastern Air Command. Southwestern Air Command was a little different. Uh, I found that because it is the Eastern Air Command at that time was a relatively quiet sector, unlike today. Uh, Western High Command was a live sector. There I found that the army and the navy were a little possessive about. They all sort of said that air power should be available when they want it, not sort of realizing that it is a finite quantity. You can't. It's not unlimited. So if everybody starts demanding air support or air power at the same time, without so there were some challenges, but well, I suppose that's unless we reorganize ourselves. I've always been a great advocate that we have the higher defense management must undergo a change.
Mm, right. Now, you've been one of the few retired air marshals of your generation who's you know kept expressing your opinion in the public domain, writing and commenting on some of these major issues. Any thoughts of writing a a book or compiling your works in that you've written, or writing a biography, an autobiography, any of those
No, no,
things?
no, no, biography, no. No, but actually, you see, what I did feel was that with all this, the nation has invested a lot of money in making us or giving us the experience that we have when we retire.
Right.
So this intellectual knowledge actually belongs to the nation,
Mm,
because if I had been someone else in the private sector and not earned my living in the Air Force, I wouldn't have been experienced in this particular domain of national security or air power
mm,
that I have.
right.
And and I should share it with the people, because what in our country what we find is, I've seen in the UK where I've spent some time, that the public is extremely knowledgeable about national security and defense matters.
Mm,
The press is very enlightened.
mm,
They ask the right questions, they ask the searching questions,
mm,
and therefore the government and the services and everybody are on their toes,
right.
and taking the right actions, hopefully, which are in the national good.
Mm,
In our country, there is no debate amongst the civil population. Now, because you are a democracy, if nobody raises these questions from amongst the public, then to the political parties or to politics generally, who are more interested in day-to-day politics and winning elections and so on, this is not a high priority area.
right, right. Mm,
Yeah, you see, so how do we educate the public on these issues? So, fortunately for me, I was I wrote a few articles in the Statesman and all, which they published. But I found that when I used to write articles, the odd times of India or somebody may publish, but most didn't publish. Okay, because either they didn't meet their editorial requirements. I don't know. Then I met a gentleman who was editor of the editorial page of the Telegraph in Calcutta, who is now the vice chancellor of Ashoka University. He is a historian called Mr. Rudrangshu Mukherjee. His wife was vice principal of Welham Girls' School, and and I was on the board of Welham Girls' School. So in one of the founders' day, we just got talking, and he said, "You've got so much experience in service. Why don't you share with the people?" And I said, Rudrangshu, the problem is that I want to exactly do this, but I get disappointed because when I write something on something current, which should actually excite the public at large, papers don't publish it. So he said, "Listen, you send me the articles." And this was in, I think, around 1999. And for the next maybe uh, 20 years or maybe 18 years, every column that I sent to him, and there are over 100, he published in the Telegraph. So I have, I on and I used to write on things which have suddenly happened, which should generate some debate amongst the public. So today historically it may have no value because it was something which happened in 2000 or something. But at that time it was current. Some people should ask questions. Some parliamentarians should raise it. If those are the sort of things. So yes, so I did that a lot, but no book and biography and all is no, no.
right. Anyway, I, I've taken so much of your time. I cannot thank you enough. Thank you for your service. Thank you for continuing to share your knowledge and wisdom with.
And just to wind up to say that Ramu and Sepa and myself, I think we were the three musketeers known as that in the Air Force, and we served together for a very, very long time. I'm afraid I'm the only one left, and I don't know, you know. But
Well, we wish you good health and a long life, sir. And thank you so much for taking the time today.
thanks very much, Gala. Take care.
Visual, before visualize. Just 70, Roger, report time southeast, connection, for midway, and fuel selected.
Well, folks, that's all we have time for this week. Join us again next week. In the meantime, sign up for updates at blueskiespodcast.com. There you'll find links to follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. You can also write to us with your comments, questions, suggestions, and feedback from the website or to blueskies@prganapati.com. Subscribe to the podcast on any podcasting platform such as Stitcher, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and even on YouTube. If you like what you heard, share it with your friends, give us a rating in your favorite podcasting app, and write us a review. It will help other people find us. I want to give my thanks to Saurav Chordia for our logo and Prithvik for the music. I want to reiterate that all the views expressed here are personal, and this podcast has not been approved by or reviewed by the Air Force, Ministry of Defense, or any branch of the government. In the meantime, stay safe and Jai Hind.